Each letter is a story. It's a memory in time, captured through a story in the person's words.
It's amazing how there was this camaraderie at the post office, wasn't it?
It felt like Postman Pat, actually, just driving around in a van, around the farms,
It's too good of a building to just be forgotten about.
It powered the final leg of the Industrial Revolution, served the nation through 2 world wars, and was a lifeline for those with loved ones on the other side of the world. Though it served the community for close to a century, Dewsbury Central Post Office on Wakefield Old Road now sits empty with an uncertain future. The legacy and memories of this historic building, however, can never be forgotten. My name's Ruby Jones, and you're listening to Post, Present and Future Destination Dewsbury. This 5-part podcast series is part of the Post Office Cultures Project and is dedicated to exploring the history of the beating heart of a historic West Yorkshire town, told through the voices of those who call it home one letter at a time. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Post, Present and Future Destination Dewsbury with me, Ruby Jones. In the last episode, we went through the tragic story of the workers of Dewsbury Central Post Office who lost their lives in the First World War. This instalment of the series is all about one of the most positive transformations to take place in the town during the second half of the 20th century, which is the story of migration. It would be impossible to tell such a complex and rich story in one singular podcast episode, but a brief explanation is as follows. At the end of the 1940s, a combination of labour shortages in Britain and the partition of India led to many South Asian people coming to Britain and settling in areas like Dewsbury and the wider region of Yorkshire. And for those with relatives and family back home, Dewsbury Central Post Office played a pivotal role in connecting those with families on the other side of the world. For this episode, I spoke to someone who made the journey all the way from India right here to Dewsbury. And although they arrived just as Dewsbury Central's post office was closing and fading away, they explained to me the invaluable role of sending and receiving letters and parcels from loved ones back home.
My name is Supriya Nagarajan and I am a vocalist, singer, composer, and I'm based in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire. I run Manasamitra, which is a South Asian arts organisation based in Dewsbury.
This was one of those things where I was putting together the questions for this and I was sort of coming up with a bit of a blank, and I thought, where's a good starting point if we're going to talk about migration to towns like Dewsbury and West Yorkshire? Where's a good place to start with that, do you think?
The reason for my migrating to Dewsbury is circuitous, actually. So in 1996, my husband migrated to England, first of all, because he's a doctor and he was starting his training here, and he's a surgeon. So he came here. I'm an accountant by profession, so I used to work for HSBC in India, and it's just so happened that HSBC, or Hong Kong Bank as they were known, merged with Midland Bank in 96. And because they merged, and I had the experience of the parent bank, which is Hong Kong Bank, I was asked to come across and help in 1997. So since my husband was already here, 1 year stretched to 4 and then more, and then the children had 2 children then. So migration for us as a family was economic, and we just came out, and once the children had adapted, this was where they wanted to be, so we are, and that's how the journey started, and the children continue to be, and we are happy here. So this is now our home.
Can you remember the first time you sort of arrived in Dewsbury? Could you paint us a picture of what that was like?
I arrived in Dewsbury through quite a circuitous route, like I mentioned. So we first came to Worcester, which was a nice little cathedral town in summer. The ducks were on the river, and it was really beautiful, idyllic England. We enjoyed that really. Then it was my next stop, because Raja was training. The next stop was Starbridge in the West Midlands, and then it was Crawley near Sussex, and then we went to Wigan in the north, Jersey in the Channel Islands, and we came to Dewsbury from Jersey. So it was quite a leap. It was nice and sunny the day we left Jersey, and on the day we landed in Dewsbury, snow was about 7 inches. And I was completely despairing about how leaving a warm, nice tropical weather and coming into really cold Dewsbury. But the warm-hearted people kept us here, and it's been, Yorkshire is always, I feel, one of the friendliest parts of the country because, we fitted right in. We could continue to stay, and we have stayed in Yorkshire ever since that journey from Jersey.
And so, like you say about the sort of friendliness of the Yorkshire people, were you sort of welcomed with open arms when you arrived into Dewsbury in this sort of area?
Yeah, I mean, we always faced a positive reaction, wherever we went, whether it was in the local community places, spaces, it was the shops. There was always a hello and a greeting and a second to acknowledge each other's presence. Those little nuances made us feel really welcome. Whereas we could have gone to a city where people didn't have time for each other, but we always felt that in Yorkshire there was time for each other. We found our community, which included people that are doctors, people that are accountants, because I was an accountant then, and then now musicians. So I feel like there's a lot of multicultural as well as multi-activity people in and around the communities here. So we felt very welcome, and we still do.
So obviously we're talking about the sort of post office here and sort of how that links together. Were you contacting family back home when you arrived in England, and how were you doing that?
In the initial stages, yes, it was all about writing letters, receiving cards, feeling really good when actually the card dropped into the post box. There were a few emails even then. By the time I had arrived in 1998, Yahoo became a thing. We started emailing each other, and there were mobile phones, but still we had calling cards because phones still internationally were expensive. So that was our way of contacting people. It was all receiving wonderful physical objects through the post when we arrived. And then slowly we have now moved into this culture of everything being digital. Even now, I have preserved some of the letters that my friends and my relatives sent. And even now, actually when the post office's culture project came up and I became part of it, I actually sat down one day and picked out all the letters that I had saved. And I started to read them, and it was fascinating, the difference between sitting down and having a leisurely thought process when you write a letter versus how you sit in front of a PC and you dash something off. There is a marked difference in my writing style, for example. I actually cherish that whole process of reading through all my old letters. A joy that I think is lost at the minute. Hopefully will be revived.
Like you said, it's a different writing style, isn't it, when you're putting pen to paper rather than just sending a quick instant text. And I suppose, like you say with your friends, if maybe they were only sending one letter, they had to be really thoughtful about what they put in, didn't they, and really considerate about what they sent to you.
Absolutely. They not only would we have to be thoughtful when we sat down and write a letter, we also would have to consider what information we had already passed on, how much we want to actually deliver, and all the important bits. So as you write the letter, you are sort of ruminating on all the information in your head as well. And sometimes you leave difficult bits away. Say, for example, family from India is writing. If there has been illness in the family, for example, they would tell you that somebody had been slightly unwell, but they were feeling much, much better now. Whereas, if you had an instant messaging system, you would just tell somebody, oh, I'm really unwell. And, that prompts a conversation. And in a way, that's a good thing because you're updated with both good and bad information. But actually, the storytelling that evolves when you actually sit down and spend time writing to somebody, telling them about your life, about the people around you, I think that magic is something different.
The time factor is really interesting with a letter as well, because how long would you say it took back then for them to send a letter to get to you or something like that, or for you to get one back?
Anything between 2 to 3 weeks, because the letter would then wind its way from the post office in India to a central place here, and then come to a regional central place here, and then come to the local post office, and then be delivered. So anything, quickest would be 10 days, and the longest would be about 20 days. So, it could take any length of time, but if it's a simple letter. Parcels vary depending on the seasonality. But I think it was the letters and the cards postcards that were more nicer to receive.
And you said about physical objects being sort of sent and received. What sort of things were you sending and getting sent?
Simple things, like I said, the cards, if somebody wrote to you talking about a celebration, sending pictures, sending photos, actual photographs, printed photographs. It could be you receive a parcel with some new clothes. It could be any little thing, but even if it isn't a parcel and if it's just something in the post which reminds you of somebody or some place, it felt really good.
Yeah, I can imagine. So were there any items where you opened up and were like, oh, this is a reminder of home, like that? Was there anything like that?
I think photographs did it for me. When people went away on holidays locally, or they visited the local temple, or they did things that I would have been part of, but I couldn't be because I was so far away. And they sent those pictures to remind me of, things that I could have been part of in a way, in a nice way. Those are the ones that I cherish the most, photographs.
You were saying, we've got sort of instant messages now. When did the sort of decline start to happen? Was it after a few years that people stopped sending as many letters and you just send emails instead?
I think in the early 2000s, emails became more common. Skype came into existence at some point. So people started to speak on Skype. And when you're in contact with somebody across the world, instantly, the need for actually penning things down starts to decrease. So I think when Skype and email started to take center stage in people's lives, both in official as well as personal lives, I think that's when the decline started. People stopped writing letters unless they had to. There was still a generation, my father, for example, liked to write letters. So he would write letters, and I still hold all his letters. And there were a few people who stuck to tradition because that's what they knew, and he wasn't comfortable on a PC. Remember, we had those big block PCs on the desk. It wasn't any of this easily portable phones and tablets and things. So he wasn't comfortable, so he used to write, and he would put in a poetry book or something in there. That still continued, but that's when the decline started in the early 2000s, and by the time it was about 2005, 2007, I think the circle was complete and people preferred to actually use electronic communication because quicker, cheaper, and reached faster. So fortunately or unfortunately, that became the norm then on.
But like you say, there was an art form, like when you said you've pulled these letters out and you've read them back. There was something about them that you just don't really get anymore when you type in emails or sending instant messages.
Absolutely. I think each letter is a story. It's a memory in time captured through a story in the person's words. You don't feel the same when you print out an email and read it. That might also contain a story, but when it's written in the handwriting of somebody that is close to you and you actually imagine them putting that ink to paper, that imagery is much, much more powerful, and that story is much, much more powerful.
We've seen other types of sort of older media. We've seen a sort of resurgence in over the years, and you think, well, this could go the same way. Like when we've been doing these workshops with the college students, when we've given them postcards and they've handed around postcards, they really enjoyed looking at them because they were sort of retro and they sort of enjoyed looking at the images and looking at them. So you think there's something here. There's definitely something here that everybody sort of can relate to, and everybody looks at it and thinks, oh, this is really good. This is really interesting.
I agree. I mean, if you look at the whole system of physically writing a letter, putting it in the mailbox, and then somebody collects it from the mailbox, takes it somewhere, sorts it, and then, it ultimately, after a lot of travel, it reaches its destination. When you think of that process, I think it is a whole meditative exercise in itself. Also, of course, on a commercial basis, it gives jobs. Somebody has a job doing all of those intermediate steps. Pushing all that out of the way has meant that the joy of storytelling is in some ways a little bit lost, along with the jobs, of course, but that whole meditative exercise of storytelling has been truncated as well as sometimes even lost. Hopefully, it's definitely, I am positive that the enjoyment of actually physically receiving postcards and letters will return, and at least as a exercise, it'll be nice to test it out to see how people feel about it.
One of the really interesting things that came up through this project was researching the tape letters project in Bradford. Have you heard about that?
You mean the letters that were recorded and sent across
Yes.
to Pakistan?
Yeah, on cassettes, sort of
Yes.
back in the sort of 70s, 80s and 90s. Again, that was a fascinating thing that me, just sort of living in Britain all my life and growing
Yeah.
up here, never even considered, never even thought about it. But listening to the excerpts of some of those letters when researching, like what you were saying, it really sort of hammers home the emotional side. Being able to hear someone's voice on one of these cassettes must have been really powerful and really special for those families back then.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've heard about the project. I don't know enough about the project, but the very thought that there'll be cassette played somewhere in your home with a lot of people standing around waiting to listen to your voice because they haven't heard from you for a very long time, that feels so poignant. And because trunk calls were very expensive, you didn't make calls willy-nilly. So when you made a call, even in our case, when we made a call, the family would stand around the phone and everybody would want to have a quick word because everything was quick. You can't be speaking for a long length of time. But with a letter, you wrote down a lot of things, put it in the post, and they read the letter. And then when you called, at least they could just about hear your voice.
Yeah.
So that's how we did it, yeah.
But it's crazy to hear as well how technology has transformed in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
Let's say under 30 years, we've
Yeah.
gone from that, phone calls being out of the question, maybe once in a very long time, to now being something you could do almost for free, can't you, pretty much every day if you wanted to.
WhatsApp has connected, application like that has connected us so closely, maybe too much, because, you're constantly bombarded now on WhatsApp with, queries. But then you also have the ability to pick up the phone to your loved ones at a blink of an eye. So I'm all for it because I now have friends and relatives scattered across the globe.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. That conversation really highlighted to me the power of letter writing, and it certainly inspired me to pick up a pen and paper to get sharing my thoughts and feelings. Now, we've spent 3 episodes talking about Dewsbury, the post office, and their histories from an outsider's and customer's perspective. In episode 4 of this series, we'll be going behind the counter and finding out all about the secret life of one fascinating West Yorkshire postman. This podcast was produced as part of the Post Office Cultures project. The interviewee was Supriya Nagarajan, with editing and post-production from myself, Ruby Jones. Thanks for listening.